This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication. Welcome to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. Are you somebody that has a fear of public speaking? How about entering a room where you don't know anybody? Do you come up with an excuse anytime you get invited to a networking event or maybe a wedding where you don't know anybody? My guest today is Lisa Mitchell. She's an expert in all things communication. Lisa is the founder of Power Body Language, specializing in nonverbal communication skills, coaching high-performing executives, and providing expert analysis during jury selection. She's a certified forensic interviewer and a certified body language trainer. She holds a master's degree in management and works with companies and organizations worldwide to provide best-in-class communications workshops, training, and keynote speeches. Lisa and I have a lot to discuss today about crafting your message and creating your own brand. But if you're focused on becoming better as a public speaker, make sure to listen to the full episode as we leave you with some key tips on how to perform better when you're on stage. Welcome to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. I'm your host, Dave Thompson. I am here with longtime friends, keynote speaker, expert in all things communication, Lisa Mitchell.
Hey, I like that intro.
I got a lot
Keep
more.
going. Don't let me interrupt.
I'm gonna wait. People have to listen to the whole thing to hear your whole intro. How are you this morning?
I am fantastic. I'm getting caffeinated. Things are looking up, and I'm here with you. So and your amazing audience. So it really is peak.
Where else
Peak day for me.
would you rather be? You know, that's the way to
Nowhere.
kick off your day. We
Absolutely.
we got a lot to go through today. We're gonna address some of the concerns that I hear from people all the time in our training programs or people that listen to the podcast that love all things communication, right? They love listening to it and talking about it. What they hate doing is having to do it themselves. So things like public speaking or having to walk into a room full of people that you don't know and how to represent yourself and practicing and training and knowing that I'm a confident person and I'm going to do great in this job interview and then completely freezing in the moment. So I think this episode is perfect because you're the right guest to kind of address how to really craft your message the right way.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. I am a person who, despite having a professional skill set in communication, hates walking into a room full of people I don't know. So I am right there. I only started really learning this stuff because I was terrible at it and was tired of feeling so awkward all the
Yeah,
time. So
same. And we're going to get into, I've got a list here of kind of like the top five, what I think are the top five keys that I've learned how to be a better public speaker, but I'm kind of curious what you think of those. But I want to hold off on that because
yeah,
for you to get to the point that you're at now, every time I talk to you, you're in a new venture. And so I know one of the things that you did is you're the founder of your company, the Power Body Language, which is something that you've worked on for a while. And we had a chance to show up on Indie TV. Is that the right?
yeah, yeah. We
Yeah.
were on Indie. I think at that time it was called Indie Style.
Indie Style. That's what it was.
Yeah, it was a fun little morning lifestyle show here that they were nice enough to care about communication and helping their audience show up in all sorts of different situations. And yeah, we get to do all sorts of fun stuff together. We get to go on
Yeah.
TV and share stages and dynamic duo, if I do say so myself.
Well, what got you into that? That's what I'm curious about. I mean, and we talked about body language. I know the first time we talked about it, and this is going back years ago, I remember we had a discussion that, body language is something, nonverbals that can really be problematic when people are kind of misclassifying them or thinking that somebody's lying when they're really not, or thinking somebody's nervous when maybe it's something else that's going on. But what drove your interest in the first place?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer in just learning the things that I fail at myself. And so from a previous chapter of my life, I was made acutely aware of how much attention I was not paying to, like, I wasn't paying attention to the cues that people were giving me. I was taking things very much at face value of just listening to the words and not really picking up when there was, disparities between words and actions, or some sort of incongruence where it's like I'm hearing one thing and that's easier to believe than what I'm actually seeing. And then on my side of things, from an ownership standpoint, I was really, really bad at communicating clearly what I needed, what help I needed, what type of support I needed, like just not advocating for myself. And that was both, verbally and then really showing up in a way that was compelling and authentic and helped me connect to people. So I was, I'd been accused of being a little aloof, even though I really cared about things, right? Like I wasn't showing up in the spaces I needed to be showing up in the way I thought I was. And it hurt me a lot. So I needed to just figure out the skill set that would help me do better, because I make a lot of mistakes. I just don't like to make the same ones over and over again. So it really was me getting intentional about figuring out how to bridge that gap for me.
Yeah, and I think to normalize the word aloof, I think, and I know most people are, when I use that term and change it a little bit, right? Most people have like a truth bias, where people take for granted that somebody's saying something at face value. I believe it to be true. And one thing that we see on the investigative side of things is there's this investigator bias, which is more focused on, I think everybody's lying to me. And really both of those extremes are wrong. And so even getting rid of like just truth and lie, how much when you're working with executives, which I know you do all the time, and you're coaching executives and people in this C-suite, so people that are founding companies and leading multi-million-dollar businesses, do you see the same issues with these people that are just not socially aware of what people are really communicating?
All the time. Yeah, all the time. And some of it is, I mean, there's a couple of theories around why that is, right? And it's, if you're in a position where you aren't necessarily challenged or given a lot of feedback, you don't always know when you're not landing the way you want to land, or you're not being clear to the degree that you think you're being clear, right? So if you're someone who's used to saying things or giving direction, and people go and figure out how to execute on that, you assume you're a good communicator, and you assume that you're clear, and you assume that you're receiving feedback, and kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's on everything. And it's just an assumption because there isn't a lot of challenge to that. And it seems like the higher up in an organization you go, or the bigger your title gets, the less feedback people are comfortable giving you. And they're kind of figuring out how to execute even in spite of your lack of clarity in some cases. And so people are usually really surprised when they have someone like me that comes up and kind of challenges that, or gives them opportunity to be more clear, be more intentional about how they're connecting, not just on things that need executed on or strategic type of communication, but even that interpersonal. How are you connecting with your team? How are you connecting to your stakeholders or your shareholders or your board members? How are you representing your brand in your business to the broader public? Because people are always watching, we're always forming opinions. So it really is an opportunity to kind of pause, take a snapshot, do some honest evaluation, and then figure out, what skills or tactics can we start being more mindful about building that are going to help increase the positive outcomes. Because I think everybody's working with good intentions, right? It's just sometimes you just don't really get how you land.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I've experienced this myself. My takeaway from that is, if you're a leader, it doesn't matter if you're in a leadership role or not. If you're giving direction or communication, be open to that feedback. Actually, request that feedback, right? Solicit it. I've learned what you just described, probably more so from being in the training environment. And you've done this, right? But we're going out and you're training a program, and maybe you have a specific practical exercise that you want the team to do. And this just happened to me last week. I had a small group. It was an advanced class that we were doing. And so I gave an assignment, I guess, for the group to all work on something. And I'm walking around kind of checking on both groups and just hovering a little bit to let them do their thing. And I see that both groups, I think it was a total of 8 people, had filled out this form completely incorrectly. And I'm thinking, well, what in the world are they doing? I gave clear direction. And then I started thinking, well, wait a second. If all 8 people got it consistently wrong, I'm the problem. And so, but learning that somebody, for like my perspective, of course, I'm thinking I'm a great communicator. I'm teaching communication, and I was not clear. But I've seen the same thing in project assignments, the way emails are communicated, conference calls. just because somebody executed something wrong, maybe it wasn't their fault. Maybe they didn't really know what they were supposed to do. I mean, is that something you see a lot in your work?
Yeah. Yeah, all the time. And it seems like the higher level of expertise that you're bringing into a conversation, the less level of detail or instruction that you're mindfully providing. And it's, the curse of knowledge, right? So the more familiar you are with something, the more you assume other people are familiar with it. And then that's where that understanding gap can really be problematic and cause conflict or in some cases really derail a strategic initiative if you aren't constantly checking in. And to your point, right, you kind of do what I do, which is like walk around and creep. I call it creeping, right? Like I creep on my groups during exercises and just to kind of make sure it landed the way I thought it did. And yeah, I've been surprised on more than one occasion where I'm like, this is so clear to me, but obviously I assumed they had knowledge that they didn't, and it was my responsibility to provide that additional context or clarity or instruction to make sure that there wasn't room for misinterpretation.
Yeah, I get that all the time. I've learned so much in the last several years at our firm, and working with some experts. A shout out to Joe Wolf, who's on our team, who's really just an expert in adult learning and creating curriculum and learning objectives. Sometimes you put together, and this doesn't even have to be if you're not a trainer. This could be you're going to a meeting or on a first date or a job interview, and you think, right, you're communicating something, and we'll put together a class or maybe a chapter in one of our programs and think, here's the objective for that class. We want people to walk away learning this, this, and this. And we've got this vision of how it's executed. But then we forget, not only are we training the attendees, we first have to train our other trainers on how to have that same vision. And what's amazing to me is, as trainers and expert communicators, we go out and watch 10 of our instructors teach the same exact thing. It's probably done 10 different ways. And so it's trying to be a more effective communicator to make sure it's done consistently, but also being open to realize maybe there's 9 other ways that are much better than what we envisioned in the first place. So it's having that kind of open dialogue and open to criticism.
Yeah, and you kind of have to put your ego aside, right? Like you're the expert, you're writing the curriculum, somebody's doing it differently. It doesn't mean that they're doing it wrong. And so to be able to have that open, curious perspective instead of that more punitive, you're doing it wrong perspective will, I think, elevate the overall quality and the overall facilitation of the material. But a lot of people, it can feel like either people don't respect what you've created, right? If there's like this egocentric view of, well, this is the right way to do it, and people aren't respecting that. And you see this in the workplace all the time, especially in multi-generational workplaces where there's a way it's always been done versus a different way that it could be done. And how is that embraced and how is that discovered, and what do those conversations look like?
Right.
Because that is what I'm seeing a lot, is kind of the different approach and the frustration that occurs in a multi-generational workforce around, it's the younger generation coming in is thinking, gosh, like there's just no innovation. Everything's got to be done exactly how it's always got to be done, despite having a whole new approach or new tools to do it. And then the older generation is like, well, everybody just wants a shortcut, or they don't care about the process or whatever, right? And so you get this conflict, and you get really this, just people just aren't excited to be in that environment when you have that kind of push-pull instead of that collaborative, how else could this be done, or how else could I be more clear to have it executed?
Talking about people not being excited to be in an environment, the word networking makes some people just run away and hide, right? There you go. There's one. If you're not watching,
Yeah.
Lisa's hand was up.
Right here, hate it. Yeah.
And networking could be anything, right? It could be in a professional environment, you go to a conference and there's a networking reception or an event. It could be you have to go to a wedding as maybe somebody's +1, you don't know anybody else that's there, or a family party.
Name your sauce right there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
hate all of those scenarios. Yeah.
it can be really uncomfortable, but there's some people that thrive in those scenarios. There's some people that avoid them, and I'm ask your feedback on this. But one of my first, I guess, interactions in a networking event is a long time ago when I was in the corporate world. I had the chance to be part of a development day. So we had a group of, I'm going to put in quotes, high potential people. So allegedly, I was part of this group at the time. I don't know what
Allegedly,
happened
right?
at
Yeah.
that point. But the reason I say that is there was a group of us, and it was kind of a competitive space, right? We're all trying to make a name for ourselves, and we had a like a full day or 2 days, whatever it was, together where we had different assignments and group projects and business plans, whatever. But what I did not realize at the time is that that evaluation actually started the first night I got there. Is
Mm.
we fly into the airport. We had somebody pick us up, and a group of us all land at the same time. So now we're in like a little van where we got a handful of us all driving from the airport, commuting to the hotel. Then that night there was a dinner and I don't know, an hour or two of like drinks and kind of hanging out at the bar with some of the corporate staff. I'm being evaluated the whole time, right? I get
Of
feedback
course. Yeah.
afterwards about how did I communicate at the airport and the shuttle ride, and was I too quiet? And then did I talk to enough people at the networking event? Did I make a conversation last too long? It was terrible. My feedback, I
Yikes.
hated it.
Yeah, that's brutal. That feels like a hit job to me, but
Yeah, but now I
yeah.
realize that now that's kind of my, I feel like 90% of my life is doing these kind of interactive events. But if you were go back to that time and you're my coach and I told you, hey, by the way, I've got this thing coming up next week, what advice would you give me on how to maybe be my better self in those circumstances?
Yeah, I think, one of my rules now is whether it's coaching or reminding myself is be on before you're on. And it's this concept of when you think about how first impressions work, right? And how quick they are. And a lot of times now we don't even get to make our own first impression in person. It's people finding us digitally, whether it's social media or LinkedIn or a company website. So the jury's already deliberating a lot of times on if they like you or they don't like you. They want to be closer to you. They want to keep a distance from you, like before you even get in the same physical space with people now. But that just makes those interactions in the physical space that much more important, because what you're doing at that point, if they already think they know who you are, you're either proving them right or proving them wrong, right? And so in that case, it's being on before you're on, assuming if you're in the same space with someone that they are always forming opinions. And it can be just kind of that, lizard brain. Am I safe? Am I not safe? Is this person a threat? Is this person a friend? Or it could be a deeper evaluation of like, I think maybe this guy is a little shy. So I'm going to be looking for evidence and cues and clues that confirm my assumption, because that's where like confirmation bias likes to show up, right? I have an opinion. I'm obviously brilliant and smart and so good at reading people, as we all think we are. So you just start looking for those things that are going to most closely align with what you already thought. Or you're going to notice the things that are like, oh, well, maybe I got this wrong about this person. Let me start looking for other cues and clues that are going to help me figure out who this person really is. So your job in as a participant in that situation, or knowing that that's how people are evaluating you, is really to figure out how you want to show up before you get there. So being on before you're on. It's like my goal from the time I get off the plane is I want to make connections. I want to prove that I'm competent. I want to prove that I'm trustworthy. Maybe think of a story or two that you feel comfortable sharing about yourself, because in that environment, there's going to be some version of tell me about yourself, or what do you like to do, or something on that more personal level. So instead of freezing up on the spot trying to think of something interesting and compelling, have an idea or two, a story or two that kind of in your pocket that you can relax into telling, and just have a natural delivery. Let your facial expressions show when you're happy about something or stressed about something, or use your gestures to really help punctuate the important parts of your story. It's just really getting comfortable with the mechanics that help people form the right impression about you.
Yeah, I thought a ton of really good feedback there, and I always have your game face on, right? I think about it all the time. If we're going to train a class or we're going to a conference, it's like as soon as that hotel room door closes and I'm in the hallway, it's on, right? Because you don't
Yeah.
know, are you going to interact with a potential, client or partner or a supervisor or somebody that, you're representing your own brand and the organization in all spaces. I mean, you seem to bump into people. It could be at the airport, right? We've got
Oh,
backpacks that
always.
have our brand on it. So the amount of people I've bumped into that recognize the brand, So if you're being a jerk to the server at the bar at the airport and you're representing the brand, that's going to carry on with you. So always have the game face on.
Yeah, and people are always watching. Like we don't get to behave badly and not have somebody see it, right? Whether it's being captured on a phone. I was waiting for a pizza a couple weekends ago and had a whole grown man like lose his mind because his food took so long, to the point of walking back into the kitchen and verbally assaulting the poor teenage girls working at the counter and just making the biggest scene ever, right? And what did people do? There were like 10 of us standing there, and with one exception of me trying to get the door locked behind him, right? Everybody just had their cameras out recording it, right? This is probably a guy who just maybe got bad news at work or had a fight with his wife, or maybe he was just really hungry and his blood sugar was low, right? I mean, who knows? But that moment is captured times 9, right? In the community where they live. So there is, you just always have to really be mindful of the opportunity that however you show up in the space, somebody's going to, at the minimum, notice and more commonly document, especially if your behavior is bad.
And it's got a long-term impact, right? I think about interviewers that are listening, and really, again, anybody, but a lot of times people and business leaders become very social or engaged with their team, or they're very approachable, and they're maybe the funny person in the environment, or they're the jokester of that corporate office, or whatever it might be. But then all of a sudden on Thursday, you get tasked with, you got to sit down and have a very important direct conversation with somebody, and you need to have credibility. And so it's balancing, whatever you did at that holiday party, and the way you came across, now you're sitting in a position of leadership and have to hold somebody accountable. It can be a little counterproductive. So I think that's a good takeaway. And you said something earlier about confirmation bias, and we had an episode that I'm sure you've listened to, because as most people do, they listen to all of our episodes.
I never miss an episode. Yeah.
But one of my favorite ones was with Jeff Kukuka, and he's a psychologist, and he talked a lot about biases, but he actually hit the same point that you did. So I just want to reinforce it, because I think it's really interesting. Is he said, for example, if you're told you're going to go meet somebody at this networking event, or you're going to go to a job interview or whatever, and you're told, hey, you got to go meet Steve, but good luck talking to Steve because he's really dry. He's kind of short in his conversation. He's right to the point. He doesn't like to be bothered. And so Jeff was explaining, right now you go and talk to Steve, and in your head, you're assuming he's not going to talk. He's not going to develop rapport. He's really short, and maybe in stature and in communication skills. And so you go talk to this hypothetical Steve, and because of that, you put him in a position where you're only asking short questions. You don't give him time to develop rapport, right? You set him up to be exactly who you think he is. You leave, you call your friend back and say, you're right, Steve was kind of a jerk. And he was only a jerk because you made him be a jerk. And so I thought it was a really good example, and a tie into what you said, is we often get this feedback from our peers or supervisors. Hey, if you're going to go talk to this group of people, here's their personality, which is helpful. But sometimes we stop being ourselves because of that.
Right. Like they almost set an anchor, and then we go perform in a way that makes that anchor true, right? Because we just assume that first of all, we assume that their perception of that person is accurate, and that then we also assume that person acts the same regardless of who's on the other side of their face, right? And I don't know about you, but I'm a pretty dynamic human, and depending on relationship and context and mission, you may get a different version of me depending on why we're interacting and what the objective of that interaction is. And I can't assume that I'm different or special than anybody else, right? So I think it's taking that feedback and using it as a data point, but not building your entire case around it, right? So it's going to feel familiar to you, and you're going to be like, yep, okay, I was prepared for this. This tracks. But if you leave yourself room to be curious and really perceive the situation as it unfolds in real time, then you won't get so locked into that like almost panic of, oh, well, this person is really different than I expected, right? And then it puts you kind of out of balance, and then you're the one who's kind of acting weird. Because
and then you got to keep that up.
You expected.
Right? You act weird, and then all of a sudden that becomes who you have to be for the rest of that relationship, or whatever it might be, right? And but we see that all the time, whether it's investigations, a job interview, which I want to talk about in a minute. But it could be you put yourself in this kind of facade of who you are to be liked, and then all of a sudden you get accepted into whatever this is you're looking to get accepted into, friendship, a business agreement, but now you need to carry on this fake persona. So
Right.
being
It's your
yourself,
avatar now, right? You're like, okay, what avatar do I need to put on to go have this
right,
interaction with this person because they've only seen me as avatar A, right? So I got to put fun, relaxed avatar B back away
right.
for somebody else because this person needs me to be avatar A in this situation. So, yeah, it can feel a little restrictive and it can feel a little inauthentic if you go out the door with too strong of an avatar.
Right. Well, so we talked a little bit, well, you talked about how to be better at networking, entering that conversation, be yourself, be curious, be prepared. My biggest struggle from the networking piece, it's not so much, I can go up to anybody and start the conversation and whatever. It's how do I get out of the damn conversation, right? And of course, everybody that's listening, I love talking to you, but
Right. You would never want to get out of a conversation. You're
but
way too
and there's
nice.
a couple of reasons, right? Sometimes it's to be aware that you might love that conversation, right? Maybe I met you at a networking event. I'm thinking, man, this is great. I want to talk to you forever. And this is so much good information. And we got good opportunities here. But also, when you're at an event where you're supposed to be networking, if you get siloed with one person, you've lost out on a lot of other opportunities. But it can be really difficult and uncomfortable to end a conversation and move somewhere else without making somebody feel rejected or giving the same excuse to each person that, hey, I got a call, I got to get on, I got to step away. So any advice for people at a networking event on how to best separate from that conversation that doesn't seem to end?
You mean you didn't really have a call you needed to be on the last time you walked away
I
from
knew
me
I
at
knew
the
it was
training
gonna
day?
see. You got to hold once you tell
See,
one lie,
you just told on
it
yourself.
sticks with you.
Yeah, I have found that because I know you find yourself in a situation like I do, like you do a training or you give a talk and somebody has that one thing that they just want to know, like they want you to solve their problem, right? So they'll go all the way down the rabbit hole on all the details and want basically real-time coaching or real-time advice, and it can really monopolize your time. And so what I always try to do, first of all, I take it as a cue to be flattered, not annoyed, right? Like if somebody wants to intentionally find me and share their story with me, right? Like that's an act of bravery for them to approach me and be vulnerable enough to share what their experience or their feedback is for me or whatever it may be. So I try to just put myself in a space of acknowledgement first because that makes me nicer. Because believe it or not, I don't always default to nice. Sometimes I can be a little abrupt. I know that's shocking to anyone listening that knows me. But I try to go from a space of gratitude and graciousness, and then I try to find one thing, like one sincere thing that I can acknowledge that person for, right? And sometimes it's like, you could be talking to anybody right now. I really appreciate you finding me, and sharing a little bit of your story with me. Right. So I try to do some sort of acknowledgement, some sort of just, I see you kind of moment, right? That lets them know I was listening, because a lot of people feel invisible most of the time. So, and then I just will say, I usually have like a side quest, right? Like I'll have a side quest in my pocket that is urgent that I need to go execute on, right? Or I'll be like, oh, I really need to go grab the event organizer before they take off, right? And I say, it was great talking to you. Like, thanks so much for finding me. I really appreciate the feedback, and I usually will give them another way to connect with me if I feel like there's some unfinished business, like through LinkedIn or my email or whatever, just so they don't feel abandoned. But I have 1 to 3 side quests in my pocket at any time that I can up the sense of urgency on, to, kind of bow out gracefully. Because I don't ever want anybody to feel, I know how I feel when you feel like you're a little like ignored or just, diminished a little bit in your effort to connect. Like it doesn't feel good. And
Right.
I've been on the other end of that. So I try to just, work from gratitude, give them some sort of acknowledgement or recognition, and then have a side quest, that gives me an excuse that doesn't make them feel unimportant, but, just that there's something else that's a little bit more urgent that I need to go
Yeah.
attend
I've
to.
been,
And there usually is. It's not even like bowing out with a lie. There usually is something like really do need to go do something or talk
Right.
to someone.
You're equally trying to network, right? You're equally trying to
Right.
interact with people. I've been on the wrong side of that as well, what you were just describing, right? I've talked to folks who I can tell, they're constantly scanning the room. Who else is
The
more
old room
important?
scan,
Yeah,
right?
they're
How
thinking,
can I level up?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm stuck with this bearded guy. Who else can help? Who can do something better for me right now? And that is a terrible feeling. Like you almost feel like you're just
Yeah.
talking to a wall. So I think it's very much being aware of, your own physical behavior in those conversations.
Yeah.
Taking a sidestep from networking into kind of these other areas where people have to worry about crafting their message. And I know I mentioned job interviews and kind of one-on-one conversations, which is similar to what we're talking about, just in a more intimate environment. But even more interesting, I think, is something that you've done some work on, which is jury selection and consulting with attorneys on. Well, I'm not even going to try to describe it. I'll let you get into it. But first of all, what is that? What do I mean when I say jury selection or consulting?
Yeah, so what most people think of, because there was a brilliantly written TV show. There's actually been a couple TV shows that have reached tried to display what this looks like, and of course like Bull, they have like all the great technology and gadgets and these elaborate mock juries, and everything is so easily manipulated and understood and easily read, and that really has not been my approach or my experience. I know there's a lot of I'll say more sophisticated operations and consulting firms and professionals that's like their entire career, and I kind of fell into it a little bit more organically through having relationships with several attorneys that had worked with me, had done some coaching with me for themselves and their teams, and then saw value in being like, hey, like I would really be interested to know about what questions you think we could ask as part of our jury selection strategy that would help you see people's reactions that would either indicate that they may support our elements of the case or they may be opposed to our elements of the case, right? Is that something you think you could do? And I'm like, I don't know, but we're going to try it, right? Everything's a grand experiment for me. I don't claim to be an expert in anything. But what really has developed is a pretty simplistic system where, I spend time with the attorneys prior, and I work a lot on the defense side or the plaintiff side of the fence. So from that perspective, right, it's either trying to minimize repercussions or not even really minimize repercussions. I think it's for the cases that I work on. A lot of times I don't know, and I don't want to know. I don't want to know a lot about the case, and I don't want to know if the theory is guilty or innocent. I don't want to know that, right? What I want to know is enough information about the really critical pieces of the case that we want a jury that has the capacity to listen to all the evidence, actually hear the elements of the case and the testimony, and be able to render a fair verdict, right? So it's really looking to eliminate the extremes of bias, either for or against a client, right? And understanding the personalities of who's going to end up in that jury box, and understanding who most likely is going to yield the influence, either as foreman or maybe not foreman, but still very influential in a case where you think there may be some differing opinions even after the evidence is heard, right? So it's really an interesting combination of art and science, where it's understanding good question formation, understanding words that elicit and framing of a question that elicits a response or allows you to see how somebody maybe intrinsically feels, even if they aren't the juror being questioned about their opinion on something. People are always leaking their emotions and leaking their truth, and so it's really like what questions in what order can we ask that reveal enough of the key elements of our case that would let me see, if I'm sitting in the courtroom, let me kind of observe the subtle and not so subtle reactions of potential jurors to see who might be most favorable to have in that box for the client, or who might be the biggest risk. And again, it's a very inexact science, because people are people, but people are usually consistently who they are. And so if somebody For instance, if there's an element about self-defense, right? And does somebody believe that it could be self-defense if the person who was ultimately shot was shot in the back, right? Some people are like, well, no way. If they're not facing you, there's no threat, right? And that's actually a piece of a real case that we were formulating questions and setting a jury for. And it was very, like, there were situations where people you could tell considered it and saw that it was possible. And there were people that no matter what would have been presented as evidence or context would have been like, no way, never could happen, right? And people were really clear with their facial expressions and their body language and affirming the question or denying the question, right? There was a lot of data points revealed by just a really simple question that then helped us decide, who would be best, who could most fairly evaluate the evidence versus who would maybe have a stronger sense of bias.
One of the first things you said in that description, which is helpful, was you want somebody who has the capacity to evaluate the evidence fairly, right? And that's interesting because
it's never about finding someone who's enthusiastically in favor of one outcome or the other. Like, those are the people you most kind of want out,
right?
Of a jury. You want the people that are very thoughtful and contemplative and don't maybe have a strong reaction one way or the other.
Right. I think if I want somebody to evaluate me, I want somebody who's open-minded, because if I know that I have, whether it's a trial or a job interview, whatever it is, I know I'm going to put my best foot forward. So I want the most fair person to evaluate it. Right. Somebody that's, we're in this election season right now. Let's not even think about doing politics on this. We don't have enough time.
Oh no, I gotta go. Sorry.
Yeah.
I got another call. I got a call I gotta make, Dave. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Side quest. But it's the same. It's the same thing. I feel like, people listen to a debate or a commercial or whatever, a 30-second TikTok clip, and I don't know how many people's opinions are actually being changed at this point if they're not open to evaluation, right, and open to critical thought. So, but I think it's interesting, and the reason I want to bring it up on this call is how much communication impacts and awareness of communication, even nonverbals, can impact the justice system, right? Understanding where the juror is and how the attorney represents a case.
It's huge. I'll tell you, like, I think we're all, familiar with the concept of a jury of your peers, right? And that's how, in many cases in our justice system, that is kind of the ultimate deciding factor in a lot of outcomes. Like, really, life or death deciding factors are held by a jury of your peers, right? And to me, I've yet to see a jury of true peers, but that's a topic for another show.
Right.
Right. So you already have that challenge, and there, for me, a jury of peers would have some element of shared reality, like some sort of commonality outside of living in the same county or living in the same state, and there just isn't. And again, in my experience, which is extremely limited, so I'm not speaking as an expert on that, but it really is so critical and so consequential. And they're really, like, I'll tell you, I did a murder case.
Glad you finished that sentence. That sentence different.
No, I did. I consulted on a case that involved the element of murder.
Okay, good. I was about to advise you. You're right.
Yes, and that was not a confession. That was me pausing at a bad place. But I consulted on a jury selection for a murder trial, and one of the things I don't think people understand is you can prepare as an attorney or as a prosecutor. You can prepare for weeks or months, and you can have more, banker's boxes than you can imagine, full of documents and things like that. But really, we had collectively, between defense and prosecution, we had an hour to select a jury for a murder trial. It was 20 minutes, first round, 10 minutes, second round, 5 minutes, make your strikes, jury sat.
Yeah, it's
right.
terrifying.
And I don't think people understand the speed at which, I mean, we see the big celebrity trials, right, where it's like days and days and days of jury selection and all these in-depth questionnaires and the opportunities to go super deep with every potential juror. And I don't believe that's the reality for a lot of just average Americans that find themselves in the justice system. So you can prepare and you can strategize on the questions you're going to ask and the way you're going to evaluate and the type of jury mix that you hope to be able to put in the box for your trial to get the most fair evaluation of the evidence. But when it comes to the mechanics of how that process works, it really was so eye-opening to me and really, frankly, disheartening to me to see how little, no matter how much preparation is done by prosecution and defense, right? Like it's both tables working really, really hard to get the right people in the box for this case. It's just incredible to me how quickly and how limited that process really is from a mechanics and time standpoint, knowing that the consequence can be someone never getting out of jail or facing the death penalty. Like it's, I had no idea. I really did not have the idea of what that process felt like until I was in it.
12 people deciding which attorney tells a better story is kind of how the justice system works. Unfortunately, it's a little terrifying.
Well, and then if I just one other thing on the justice part of it, right? Because that word I always put in quotes, right? Is the prosecution is state funded. The prosecution table in these cases is rolling 4 to 8 people plus deep, funded, paid for, right? The person whose life is in the balance has to privately fund their own defense. So the tables are never equal is all I'm going to say on that. And that's just the rules of the system that we have made up. But when you're sitting there and you have the family of the victims on one side of you and you have the family of the defendant on the other side of you, and they're both facing monumental life-changing losses, it's just a feeling that, like, I walked out of the courtroom the first time I did it and I cried. I sat in my car for like an hour and cried because it was such an overwhelmingly rude awakening of just how complex and how consequential it is to try to have a case where it's actually where you can feel good about saying justice is served, regardless of the outcome, right? There's just so much complexity and so much speed and such a disparity between resourcing. I don't know. For me, it was one of probably the most eye-opening experiences that really impacted me. Like,
it's not Law and Order the way people may see it on TV. Yeah, no, I agree. And the part you just hit on, that emotional investment in, and this goes to the last topic I want to get into, which is public speaking. But I think about the attorneys, right? They've got, if it's a jury trial or even if it's a bench trial and a judge is making a decision, but if you have the jury there and they start to empathize more with the victim or their family, or they empathize more with the defendant and what they went through, just that empathy and the storytelling and who you're rooting for, a juror is a human being, right? That's going to impact them as well, when instead you're supposed to be objectively looking at the evidence. And so a lot comes into how does the attorney present the story? And
it's performance. I mean,
right.
it sucks, right? It really does suck. And I know that that's part of their training, right? Is kind of that courtroom performance and the choreography of hearings and things like that. But that is one of the things when I am coaching, in addition to, kind of question strategy, word usage, like even the words you use in certain questions can elicit emotions or responses, right? So we really dissect the word usage, the order of the questions, right? The strategy from that standpoint. But then we go into and even coaching defendants, right? Like in some cases they've had me come in and help them. How should a defendant appear in court, right? Like what should their posture be? What should the behavior be? What should the talk at the table be, right? Like at what point, what questions asked do you not want to confer with each other? Or like when do you not want to look at each other when there's an answer given, right? So there really is this pretty critical component in the courtroom that you see play out, again, on the defense or the prosecution side, where there is no lack of impassioned speeches and intentional word usage and just in some cases just straight theatrics, right? Like you have big gestures and you have big facial expressions and you have walking faster, getting closer to the jury, stepping back from the jury, right? Like you see all of these just giant nonverbal components to the choreography and the delivering of critical pieces of the case, and you see the jury respond to that. And I firmly believe that some cases are decided just on likability and experience with counsel, more so than the evidence or how the defendant actually shows up.
Absolutely. I mean, I know in my experience doing expert witness work and providing testimony, to me, the substance of it is the most important, right? Is I know
Right.
the content that I'm presenting to the jury or the judge, but in reality, it's, are you likable? Are you somebody, when I say likable, meaning are you trustable? Are you
Right.
genuine, trustworthy? Are you somebody that a jury or judges can say, okay, what this woman is saying or this guy's saying, I take it as truth, right? He's just trying to inform me. And so that can be difficult. And that to me goes to this other topic, which is something that I struggled with for a long time, but it's presenting in front of a large group, right? Whether an attorney has to present in front of 12 completely, hopefully diverse, which is another issue, but a diverse group of jurors. But public speaking is something where you might have to present in front of 5 people or 5,000 people. And I hated it, was petrified of it. I go back to that same kind of trauma I shared earlier about my little development day, and we had to do a impromptu elevator pitch. They recorded us. We had to critique
Brutal.
each other.
Brutal.
Oh my God. And then, but I will tell you this. So, and then I want to kind of go through this like speed round of some public speaking tips. But that experience I had, we were told, and so people can picture yourself in this situation. I was told, all right, promotion opportunity. You got a few minutes to put together a 5-minute speech on whatever you want it to be. You're going to present in front of your peers who are also competing for the same opportunity and all your supervisory staff. We're going to record it. They handed out forms, critique forms for each of us to critique each other, provided critique in the group while we had to watch the recording.
It just keeps getting worse, Dave.
Terrible.
Oh my gosh.
And I'll tell you, I did all things wrong, right? I didn't smile. I looked like just a dead person up in the front. I didn't smile, no facial reaction. I talk with my hands like a crazy person, and I didn't because I was so nervous to do so. So instead, I just swayed back and forth. This video is terrible. I still watch the video. I still have it.
You should put that in a Dropbox and send me a link for
I
my
am
own
nobody
entertainment
needs
later.
to see it but me. But I watch it about once a year. It's probably about 15 years ago that I did this, and I'm still getting better. I feel like every week I learned something from somebody else on how to be a better public speaker. But I know that is something that I just actually looked this up before we talked. 76% of people have a fear of public speaking, and there's actually
Yeah,
a name for it.
they'd rather die.
Yes.
Like literally they fear death less than speaking in public.
It's insane. Yeah, I heard Seinfeld did a bit on that. You'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy.
Right.
Right.
It's crazy.
Glossophobia is, I guess, the technical term for the fear of public
Ooh.
speaking. So that's a new one for
fancy
your
word.
SAT word.
Nice. I'm stealing that.
But before we get into just kind of some quick tips on how to be better at this, what about you? Is that something that just came naturally to you? Did you go through a level of anxiety before being comfortable as a public speaker?
Oh, I still like there are very few people that have spent time with me prior to doing a keynote. And those that do are now fully aware that I am a complete lunatic because I don't care how many times, like there's a keynote I've run for, I probably have delivered it 100 times on all different sizes of stages in front of all different audiences. I never feel less nervous before I give it. And I never, I deal with the head trash of, oh, I'm going to suck. I'm going to forget what I'm going to say. The audience is going to hate me. It's not going to land like I want it to, right? Every single time, I hope it never goes away. And the reason I say that is because I had a mentor of mine say, if you ever aren't nervous, you don't care enough. Like you've stopped caring, right? It means your ego's running the show. It means you aren't worried about connection. It means you aren't going to be as careful about the choreography of delivery. Like comfort can breed complacency. And if you're uncomfortable before you speak in public or before you give a presentation or whatever, that means that should just be like a bonus point to yourself that you really care about the material you're delivering and the experience that you're creating for the people on the other side of your face, right? And to me, like that really helped me reframe, like instead of my nervousness and my head trash and my worry being something that's a negative or means I'm not professional or I'm not prepared or whatever, it actually just means I still care to the degree that I hope I always care. And that to me has been helpful in like letting me take a breath. And I have evidence of, again, hundreds of successful, and I use quotes around that for anybody who can't see me, hundreds of successful deliveries of training and in speaking and media work and whatever. And I still care enough to be nervous. And I'm just like, you know what? It's just part of my process. And the best way to overcome that is sets and reps, whether it's rehearsing beforehand. Like for me, I feel my absolute best when I have a high degree of confidence and my mastery of the material, meaning my slideshow, AV always screws me somehow, whether my mic pack goes out or my PowerPoint doesn't work or like something, right? So I prepare every time. I prepare to the level of I don't need anything but me and an audience, right? The mic can go out, the PowerPoint can die. I'm going to get up there and I'm going to know exactly how I want to deliver this. And each time is going to be a little bit different because I swear I black out sometimes and I'm like, I have no idea what just happened, but I'm pretty sure I delivered what I wanted to. But I have that muscle memory because I am so well rehearsed and I am so well prepared. I rewrite my keynote by hand every night before I deliver it. And I've given it 100 times. I rewrite it by hand for my specific audience every single time, not because I need to, but because my brain feels more confident and then my body can just relax and really think about the choreography of delivery and the emotionality of my storytelling and my connection with the audience. But it's that preparation that buys me the freedom to care about performance, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's really powerful. Good advice. I think one of the important pieces there is that even somebody like you that I've seen you present a million times, whether it's on a TV spot or on a stage, you would never think she was nervous beforehand. She was up last night writing her keynote, right? You just get up there and you're just rocking it. But I think that's important for people to know because you have to start somewhere. And both of us in that same space, right? It can be nerve-wracking to do. So it's okay to be nervous and even encouraged is kind of what it seems like for you. And I can't write. If I wrote a keynote the night before, I wouldn't be able to read what I wrote. I'd be more stressed out. But I think the other thing you said, I didn't have this on my list of top 5 from things that we've talked about, but I'm going to add it as number 6. Never trust AV. If you're going to go public speak, and nothing against the AV people out there, you've got a hell of a job.
No, they do their best. They
Yes.
really do their best.
But there's always something. The extension cord wasn't plugged in. The microphone goes out. So,
or, Dave, we do a live keynote for a conference and, the body cam footage uploads all at the same time on the other side of the house that's a police department and eats all your bandwidth up.
There you go. Yes.
Dead on the air. We have some joint trauma from AV.
Right.
AV.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter that you did a tech run through the day before because you just never know.
But I will tell you, back to this kind of concept again with the attorneys, with Be Likeable, I have seen presentations where the AV went out, right? The computer went out or whatever. The way the presenter handled that makes or breaks the event, right? Act like you've been there before. Don't blame somebody for it. Fill the space and just keep on going. I've seen instructors do the opposite, and it's uncomfortable.
I think what gets people amped up to the point where they lose their grace when there's a glitch is the fear of judgment.
Right.
Right. And for me, that was my biggest hesitation towards anything, towards pursuing this career, towards speaking on stage or training, facilitating classes, or, even something silly like doing TikToks or, finding different media outlets to get my message out there. Right. It was the fear of judgment left me to the point that I was almost paralyzed. And there's lots of reasons for that. I won't do the psychology of it, but the thing I have learned is when I show up as is, right? And when I can call out, when something blows up, I'm the first one to call it out. Or if I'm nervous about being in front of a particular crowd, I say it. I say the hard part up front and loudly. Right? Because for me, it lets my brain say, okay, you're not hiding anything now. You've invited your audience in. And the beautiful part of that, which I would encourage anybody listening or watching this to do, right, is to trust that your audience, whether it's online or in a room, is going to appreciate your ownership of your humanity and your imperfections far more than if you are so polished and so perfect that they can no longer relate to you as being a fellow human. Right? Like, people love to kind of see things go wrong because it affirms to them that you're just like them, right? Or you're more alike than you are different. And so for me, having the courage, and it has for me been like, it takes an act of bravery to admit when something's screwed up. Or like, I have a habit when I'm speaking of saying words backwards, like flipping my words around. It's just something my brain does. It's gonna happen at some point if I'm nervous enough. I just own it. I share my humanity with my audience, and the amount of grace and just, there's like kind of a visible exhale that it's like, okay, we're all just a bunch of humans trying to figure stuff out together. It takes that glare of judgment down so far that you can just show up and have a good time with your audience. So just for anybody listening that's so worried about judgment and so afraid to put yourself out there or to get up and speak and share your story or your message, just give people a little bit of credit that they're capable of being like better humans than maybe we think they are.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. I'm going to go through these 5. I want to get your quick reaction to each one of these. And these are tips or suggestions that I've gotten from our conversations directly. Some of these I specifically learned from you. And so these are just 5 takeaways on how to be maybe a more impactful or comfortable public speaker.
Love it.
The first one I have is, comes directly from Lisa Mitchell here herself, and I just labeled it as own the room. But yes, this advice of know your space before you're in that space. Maybe a quick little takeaway what that means.
Yeah, for me, again, comfort or familiarity can also breed comfort. It's not always complacency. So it's part of my preparation, right? I try to put myself physically in the space where I'm going to be delivering my information, where people are going to be sitting there watching me. I try to either physically get in the space and walk it, so it feels familiar when I walk in the next day and I don't have to worry about logistics. Or I will even just visualize, right? Like, I visualize myself on stage or on camera, being confident, being friendly, enjoying my time with the audience. I visualize the audience enjoying their time with me, right? So my brain has kind of already lived that experience before I get up and really do it. So again, it feels familiar to me. It feels more comfortable to me. I already know the outcome I want, and I've already kind of had the feelings that I hope to have during that delivery. So it just kind of helps all my mechanics, my emotionality, my choreography of my body language. It all just kind of helps create that experience in advance.
That, to me, that's probably one of the most simple things we're going to give in this top 5, but one of the most impactful things I've done differently. I am always, if I can, get on that stage before anybody else is in the room, whether it's the morning, the day before. The first time you see the bright lights blinding your eyes, I'd rather do it without 1,000 people in there. All those things make you so much more comfortable. You see athletes do that, right? They get on the field and they're visualizing a full stadium before the game, before they're even in uniform and pad. So that's good. The second one I have is engage your audience. So it's avoiding being the lecturer, death by PowerPoint person. Engage the audience, but not forcefully.
Yeah. So I am I refuse to monologue. I'm not interesting enough to carry all the words for a full 45 minutes or an hour. I get energy from interacting with the audience and bringing them into the experience. So, and I think as an audience member, my favorite things to participate in are things where I feel like I'm included, where I kind of have a role, or I get to have an opinion, or I get to participate in a way, like maybe participate with people sitting next to me. It's just inviting people into the experience is A, it's more memorable. B, it's less stressful for a speaker to not feel like they have to take every ounce of oxygen out of the room for the whole time frame that they're up there. And C, it allows for a little bit of spontaneity and customization that you don't have to fabricate. You can actually just let the room organically create things for you to speak about or questions you can answer. So it's a little more interesting for me, frankly, to engage the audience that way and let them participate.
Speaking of that, my next tip is the beginning of a session, right? Whether it's a 1 hour speech or whatever it might be. I have now stop reading your own bio. And just to what I mean by that, to get some feedback, credibility is important, right? Maybe you have to support the reason that you're the person speaking. Maybe somebody else did that for you. But if the speaker gets up there and the first thing they do is tell me about how important they are and why I should listen to them, I immediately don't want to listen to them. So any quick feedback on that?
I think that and sometimes it is going to depend on your audience, right? Like I think the less you feel compelled to read your resume up front, the more confident you appear to be in what you're about to deliver. So for me, I used to be very heavy on, look how much I know, look at all my degrees, look at this and that. Like I would try to front load that for fear that people wouldn't, like, why should they listen to me, or why am I asking for their time, right? And it was really just an insecurity of me being accepted. It wasn't even so much about my material, because I knew my material was valuable and would be well delivered. But I think the more you can either give evidence or clues of your credentialing through a great story, or sharing an experience that you had, or even sharing something that impacted you or compelled you to master your material, that is more authentic and more interesting than reading off all your awards and credentials and degrees and whatever, right?
Right.
To me, it's a sign of confidence to maybe credential less up front and weave more elements of your experience into your material as you go.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you make a passive comment during one of your stories about a role that you had or whatever it might be. People are going, what did she just say? I want to learn more about that she had that job. So I think that's much more impactful. That ties into my fourth point, and you said this, is be memorable. And I think for me as an attendee, somebody asks, hey, you heard Lisa speak earlier today. How was she, right? How was the presentation? And of course, I'll say all these great things. But for the most part, people are going to think, well, she talked about this. She told this funny story. This was cool. And I feel like people remember maybe the first thing that you said, maybe the last thing you ended with, but more so how you made them feel throughout that process. And so for me, the takeaway, and this is the opposite of stop reading your own bio, is be memorable. I almost always start with a story. And that is probably what drives the most amount of anxiety I have before every presentation, is how am I going to kick this thing off and how am I going to end it? Any feedback on those 2 points?
Yeah, that's what people hurt themselves the most with, I feel like, is that they are too credential focused, bullet pointed at the beginning, and they are too just like abrupt at the end, right? Like literally the end, and clap and leave.
Right.
And
Q&A
like,
slide, and then yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's and again, it's how a lot of people were taught to be presenters, right, or to be speakers. So you can't always fault people for what they're familiar with. But yeah, I think stories. I like to try to bring some element of unexpected right out front, right? And sometimes it's like, I mean, I've done it with the audience at Elite Training Day, right? Like you're probably wondering why I'm speaking right now. because I knew half the room was wondering why I was on the stage, right?
Right.
At that time, I think I was the only female speaker on the agenda for that year. And what do I know, right? These are 30-year homicide detectives and credentialed, asset protection, loss prevention, executives. And what am I doing there? And so I just called it out, which I think was like, oh, okay, well, that shows some self-awareness. And yeah, I am kind of wondering, so why are you here, right? But it bought me the opportunity because it kind of surprised people to say, and it doesn't have to be something shocking, but it can be a stat or a story or just asking the audience a question, like something you think everybody's already thinking anyways that their brain might be stuck on. So I think having something that just grabs interest, and it doesn't, again, have to be inflammatory or crazy, but it needs to be relevant, but it needs to be something that people can be like, huh, okay, I'll take the ride.
Right.
You're basically asking permission for their attention for
What-
the rest of your time.
Yeah, I think that's great. What I'm seeing right now, the correlation is to social media. It's like what gets you? What's that hook on that TikTok that you didn't swipe within 3 seconds? And so,
Right.
my advice to people is look that up. Right, you can look up social media hooks, and there's lists of start with a question, start with a stat, start with a problem that you're going to solve, and it keeps people engaged. So use the same for your presentation.
Yeah. Your attention is the most scarce resource right now, and it's the one thing everybody's fighting for. So
Right.
you have to be strategic about how you are going to build that connection and that interest to then earn the right to the rest of their time. Yeah, so I try to do something like that out of the gate, and again, it varies by audience. And then as far as wrapping it up goes, I always try to just give them the opportunity to find the one thing that they thought was most interesting or could help them the most now, right? Because we cover all sorts of stuff depending on the keynote or the topic or the training, but it doesn't matter to somebody until it matters to them. It's just information until it becomes usable. So I try to always have that, like, what's the one thing that's still on your brain out of all the things I've talked about that you see how that can make something you want to do easier, something you want to get easier to get, or something you want to do easier to do.
Yeah.
Right? Write it down, put it in your pocket, test drive it today at the rest of the event, right? I give a little challenge. What's one thing you want to use or one thing you thought was most helpful to you right now? And then I try to get a commitment or a buy-in that, hey, you're going to go try this today. And just see how it feels, right? Build the muscle. Sets and reps. You gotta use it to adopt it. And so, yeah, so I do just let them target in on one takeaway. I don't give the takeaway. I don't know out of all the stuff I say what's going to resonate with that person
Right.
sitting in row B. They know. So identify that, articulate it, commit to it, and then go act on it.
Last one I have, and I don't remember where I heard this, but I'm stealing it from somebody, so I'm giving a credit to society, whoever this was. But it was a line of be the thermostat, not the thermometer. And
Yes.
what they'd explained by that is don't just read the temperature of the room, but set the temperature of the room. And I have seen both good and bad from a public speaking perspective. Right, you walk in. I had a chance to speak at a large federal agency, and right before me was a high-ranking political official who was the most boring, dry speaker I've ever seen. And it'd be really easy to just go up on stage afterwards and maintain that same temperature. But when you're the speaker, you're in control of setting that temperature. And so your energy, my takeaway from that is your energy is going to reciprocate, hopefully, from the crowd. But any feedback on that, and then we'll wrap up so that people know where they can find and learn more about you.
Yeah, I am a firm believer in you create the energy that you want to get back. And my favorite, honestly, like petty Lisa competitive thing I like to do as a speaker is totally shift the energy in the room. Like, I want to make it hard for whoever's up next to me to feel comfortable walking on stage. Right? Or whoever just got off, I want to make them be like, oh, dang, like a 180, right? And it's I'll say maybe it's a little easier for me because I'm historically in associations or industries that, like, the material just isn't super dynamic or fun. And by default, my stuff is really novel, and I can deliver it in a way that's a little more amped up than, talking about meteorological patterns in the energy industry,
Right.
right? Which is really interesting and really, really important in the energy industry, but like has a little different vibe
Right.
than what I do, right? So I try to come in and I always think of it, how would I want this to feel if I was sitting in the audience? And so I try to create, because like you, I've sat through some things I wish I never had to sit through, and found it hard to stay awake, even if it was really good information. So I try to put myself and plan my delivery in a way that I would want to experience it if I was in the audience. So yeah, thinking about the vibe, figuring out the level of energy that's appropriate or attainable with your audience, and striving to deliver something that warrants that type of reaction.
Good takeaway. And if people weren't listening to the last 5 minutes, make sure that you find something in this podcast that you can go use and practice right away.
There you go.
And let us
There you
know,
go.
right? Let us know. Give us some feedback on what was most important to you, because I know we'll both learn from that and we can help communicate it more outwardly. Thank you so much for your time today and what you're doing in this space. Best way for people to stay in tune to all the things you have going on?
Yeah, I'm all over LinkedIn, so you can find me at Lisa Mitchell on LinkedIn, or you can find me at powerbodylanguage.com, specifically for things around speaking and communication. So, and I'm on YouTube under Lisa Mitchell. I mean, you really can't get away from me.
She's everywhere. Perfect. Well, thanks, Lisa. I appreciate your time today, and thank you all for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And to keep this conversation going, follow the Truth Be Told podcast on LinkedIn and Truth Be Told CFI on Twitter. On behalf of the International Association of Interviewers, Rick Lander-Zalowski, and our valued sponsors, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast.